Sun cracks the Great Basin like a bottle light spilling across a white playa scored with salt and fissures. Jack Mercer lies face down in a seam of dried lakebed shirt glued to his chest with blood. His breath is a scrape. Sagebrush scrapes too, a dry whisper. Far-off hooves drum against the hard pan and fall silent, then pick up again. The sound moves like a hand searching. A shadow crosses him. The smell of leather and dust. A girl's feet silent in beaded moccasins stop beside his head. Her wrists are ringed by rope burns that look fresh and mean. She has a knife in her right hand and a tear in her dress at the shoulder. For a long second she does not breathe. Then he opens his eyes. They are fever-bright. Ashford Accord, he says, lips cracked. Find Eleanor. The girl's gaze flicks to the satchel under his arm. A corner of a copper tube peeks from worn hide. The tube catches sun, a thin glint. In the stillness, the playa holds the sound of his voice the way a bowl holds water. She looks east. Dark specks move along the rim of the basin. Riders. The glassy clang of a bit carries down. She drops to a knee, slides both hands under his shoulders and pulls. He is heavier than he looks and slick with blood. She drags him to the low lip of a rock shelf, honeycombed by wind. She wipes his trail with the heel of her palm, then with a twist of sage. The taste of his blood is in the air, copper and heat. Do not speak, she whispers. They pass like wolves when they smell fear. He does not answer. His eyes have rolled white again. Hooves enter the basin. 4 men dust to their knees. One wears a blue coat with the buttons cut off. He dismounts by the smear of blood. The girl did not see, crouches, touches the crusted edge of it with 2 fingers, then rubs them together. He looks around for the body that made it. His horse flicks an ear. The man's scar makes his left eye a little smaller than the right. Not far, he says. Cole Vance's voice floats thin across the flats. He will be moving slow. Spread out. Watch the rocks. The riders fan south and west. Cole lingers a heartbeat longer by the stain, then swings into the saddle. The girl holds her breath until the hoofbeats fade into the heat shimmer. Only then does she take her hand off Jack's mouth. His face is carved by sun and years. A pale scar drags across his chin. He looks like someone who has slept little and ridden much. The girl studies him with a hunter's caution and a daughter's suspicion. Then she presses 2 fingers to his throat. A pulse fights there. The satchel, she says, I keep. Her name is Lila Ironcloud. She does not tell him yet. She lifts the satchel from under his arm and sets it out of his reach. His hand flinches for it and falls. 40 hours earlier, Fort Black Ridge squats over the Carson Basin like a jaw. Wind slams the flag against the staff. Inside, Colonel Horace Blackstone sits behind a desk the color of spilled coffee, a signet ring ticking the wood. Jack Mercer stands in the doorway with his hat in his hands. It is not a commission, Blackstone says. His voice is clean as cut stone. It is a favor between men who once wore the same dust. Take this to Fort Archer. Do not read it. Do not talk. Hand it to Major Silas Monroe. This ends there. Jack does not reach for the satchel at first. The room smells faintly of kerosene, as if a lamp was snuffed a breath too late. The smell sits under the polish, stubborn and real. His eye drifts to a framed photograph of a young woman with a quick smile and wind-tangled hair, Eleanor Blackstone Mercer, his wife Blackstone's daughter. You hated that I married her, Jack says. You hated that she talked to tribesmen like men, and to you like you were just her father. Blackstone's ring taps again. I hate what disorder costs, not who brings it. The papers in this satchel correct a mistake made in haste. That is all you need. Jack reaches, takes the strap. The leather is warm. He feels something cylindrical under the flap. He does not say Ashford Accord out loud. The name has a shape in his mouth anyway. They will come for it, Blackstone adds. Men who do not care about signatures or seals. You know those men. You have ridden with them. If you falter, throw the satchel in a well and pray. Jack's jaw ticks. He puts his hat back on and turns for the door. He does not salute. On the threshold, he stops. The night my house burned, he says, the lamp in the kitchen had its globe intact. The wick had been trimmed. Eleanor did not make mistakes with flame. The report said accident. Blackstone does not blink. The ring goes still. The flag outside slaps again. When he speaks, the words land without heat. The report stands, Mr. Mercer. Take the satchel. Dusty Spur Depot sits at the edge of sage junction boards, bleached windows braced by iron. A lantern burns in the back room where crates stack like teeth. Lila Ironcloud lies on the floor with her wrists bound and her face turned to a crack in the wall. Through the slit of light, she watches boots and hears voices. 200, says a soft voice. She is Paiute. Not worth more. Too much trouble. She reads, says another voice. Cole Vance sounds like a man chewing on a nail. In Carson City, English looks like coin. 300. You haul her yourself. A chair scrapes. A bottle is set down. The lantern flickers, then steadies. Lila's fingers find a shard of glass flat as a tongue depressor under the crate, and she saws. Rope fibers rough her skin. She keeps sawing. "What about the old woman at Bitterbrush Station?" the soft voice says. "The one you call Ironcloud. She is still not talking." "Blackstone pays me to keep her breathing," Cole answers. "She will talk. Everything breathes until it does not." Lila bites the inside of her cheek until she tastes blood. The rope parts. She does not move. She waits for the bottle to tilt. It tilts. The men laugh at a small story about a quartermaster's wife. Rain starts on the roof, a clean hiss. Lila rolls to the window and slides through into the wet night. A dog lifts its head from the shadow under a wagon. Its nose twitches at her, and it decides to sleep again. Lila runs along the backs of barrels and drops into mud. Her breath steams. Thunder climbs the mountains. She aims for open country, for a thin line of willows that means water. Shots slap the depot wall where her head used to be. She does not look back. Now, Lila piles sage at the mouth of the rock pocket until it looks like the desert never noticed the hole. Inside, Jack stirs. His voice comes from a long way off. "Who are you?" he asks. "Where did you learn to pull a man like a sack of flour?" "No flour," Lila says. "Only people." "Your name?" She watches the basin instead of him. The riders are small now. She does not trust small. "My name is my own," she says. "You said Ashford Accord while dying. Why?" "Because it is not dead," Jack says. His eyes find the satchel and then her hand on the strap. "My wife wrote a map that tells the water where to go. Men who want to own all of it want that map, so they burned my house." He shuts his mouth on the last word. His face goes pale under the dust. Lila lowers her voice. "Eleanor, Blackstone, she works with the land. The elders at Willow Wash knew her. Her hands were not afraid." Jack licks his lips. The taste of metal clings. "You knew her." "I saw her once. She listened like she had all day. She had a small blue bottle. She held it to the light and smiled." The image moves through Jack like a blade pulled clean. He nods once. His hand shakes when he tries to sit. Lila slides an arm behind his back and helps him. "I am going to take you to someone who can keep you from dying," she says. "Ezra Half Moon. 2 hours through Serpent's Cut if we do not meet snakes or men." "Why help me?" Jack asks. "Because you said a name that belongs to my mother, Ironcloud. She is at Bitterbrush Station." They told each other that like a secret and thought the walls did not have cracks. Jack's eyes clear a fraction. "Your mother is Mora Ironcloud. She is medicine and memory. They do not own that," Lila says. She takes a canteen from the satchel and tips a slow spill into his mouth. The water tastes of tin and rain. He swallows, coughs, swallows again. "Footing first," Lila says. "No noise, you do not mean." They slide out of the rock mouth in a crouch, Jack tight against her shoulder. The playa stretches open and white heat wavering above it. The basin rim looks close enough to touch and a mile away. Lila keeps them in the stuttered line of low rocks that lead toward a seam in the hills where the land looks torn. Serpent's Cut sits there, a crease that swallows light. The air cools a notch as they angle toward it. Halfway, a hawk lifts from a lone juniper and rides a column of warm air. Its shadow washes over their faces and is gone. Jack tips his head, a reflex he cannot stop. Lila tracks the bird with the corner of her eye, then returns to the ground and the next step and the next. They reach the first spill of stones where the cut begins to narrow. The smell changes sage to wet limestone. In the quiet, small sounds grow loud. A pebble moves somewhere above them. Dust drifts in a soft sheet. Lila lifts her hand and Jack freezes. A minute stretches thin. Voices float down the rock in pieces and fall apart on the way. Cole's laugh touches the air and disappears. Lila points into the throat of the cut. Jack nods. They step into shadow. The temperature drops and the light goes green where moss clings to stone. Behind them, something skitters, a rabbit or an idea. Jack's boot slips and catches. Lila feels the pull of his weight on her shoulder and sets him again. She does not look back. The basin narrows to a slit of sky. Dust trembles along the lip and falls in a soft clatter into the dark. Lila takes the next step and the next. Jack breathes through his teeth. Water ticks somewhere inside the rock patient and sure. They go in. The cut swallows them in a cool hush. Light thins to a ribbon overhead. The walls breathe damp and the smell shifts to limestone and moss. Water ticks somewhere in the dark like a clock with a patient hand. Lila keeps to the firmer stone, reading the floor by feel more than sight. Jack hangs on her shoulder. His breath saws, steadying only when the air cools his fever. They climb one slow bend, then another. The slit of sky opens. A pocket valley unrolls a bowl of grass and piñon tucked under a bluff. Smoke goes straight up from a chimney and vanishes. A small cabin sits among flat stones. A corral of peeled poles holds 2 horses with calm eyes. The place looks like it has grown from the ground. Lila lifts a palm. Wait. She steps out alone into the open, empty hands spread. She calls in Paiute a low string of syllables that move like water. A rifle barrel answers from the shadow of the porch. Then a man steps into the light. Ezra Half Moon is tall and rope-thin hair gone iron gray and braided neat. His face holds both lines of an old map and the set of a soldier who once polished buttons. He does not smile. He looks from Lila to Jack into Lila again. You brought trouble that bleeds, he says. Lila nods. I brought a man who says a name that belongs to my mother. The rifle lowers a notch. Ezra jerks his chin toward the door. Inside, leave your iron. Lila slides Jack's pistol from his belt and lays it on the porch plank. Jack does not argue. It costs him to breathe. Ezra sets his rifle in a corner and clears a table that smells of cedar and clean ashes. The cabin is tidy. Shelves carry jars filled with leaves and roots and powders, a few books and worn covers, a folded cavalry shirt faded almost white from washing. A blue glass bottle sits near the hearth, its neck catching the light. Ezra cuts away Jack's shirt. The wound runs just under the collarbone, ugly and wet. He listens with his fingers, then with his ear to Jack's chest. You are lucky, Ezra says. Luck needs help. He heats a knife in the coals until it blushes. He pours clear liquor over it and over his hands. The scent slaps the room. He brings a strap of leather to Jack's mouth. Bite. Jack bites. The blade goes in. The pain rises like a white cliff and then falls the way a wave falls. He hears the knife click against something that is not flesh. Ezra's jaw tightens. He says nothing. He works. Lila stands at Jack's shoulder, her palm planted firm on his sternum to hold him to the earth. Ezra lifts the bullet with the tip of the blade, a small dark bead slick with Jack's blood. He drops it into a tin saucer. It rattles once and goes still. Ezra cleans again, then packs the wound with a mash that smells like mint and bitter tea. He binds it with linen that has been washed thin. You will hate me later for moving you so soon, Ezra says. You will thank me for moving you at all. Jack breathes through his nose. The room comes back piece by piece. He tastes leather and liquor and something green. He swallows. His eyes find the blue glass bottle. She had one like that, he says. Ezra glances at the vial. She gave me that one, he says. Said water tells the truth better in blue. He nods toward the satchel. She wrote maps that listen to rock and follow water instead of fences. The old men called her girl who hears ground. Jack's hand edges toward the satchel by reflex. Lila taps his knuckles once. Not yet. Her eyes to Ezra. Bitterbrush Station still holds Mora. Ezra's gaze darkens. I know. I have watched. He lays out a paper and sketches as he talks a quick hand. He draws rectangles and a yard and a fence line. He marks a small square away from the others. That is the small cabin where they keep your mother. One man at the door at night, too, when the colonel visits. The main house faces north. Bunkhouse on the west. Stables on the east. Dogs chained by the cookhouse. The men like their whiskey. They sleep heavy near midnight. Lila leans in. Jack watches the lines form a place he has never seen but already knows how to step through. His body is beating a slow drum under the bandage, but his mind clears. How many to stand between us and that door, he asks. Depends on how loud you knock, Ezra says. They speak as the light shifts on the floor. The plan sets the way a knock sets to a bowstring. Ezra moves without wasted motion, pulling 4 small signal flares from a drawer, 2 glass vials, a roll of wire, a wedge of jerky hard as a rail. He fills a canteen and tucks bread and dried apples into a sack. He hands Lila a coil of thin rope. He sets a battered spyglass in Jack's palm. You are not as strong as you think, Ezra says to Jack. Lila is stronger than she looks. Remember that, and your pride will not kill you. Lila checks the edge on her knife and tucks it back into its sheath. Ezra steps into the doorlight and looks at the sky as if reading larger print. He turns back and gives Jack a stripped-down rifle light and clean. The stock smells of linseed oil and histories. No shots unless you mean them, Ezra says. Fire chases sound. Dusk folds itself along the ground as they leave the pocket valley. Serpent's Cut leads them out by a shallower throat. Warm wind lifts, brings the smell of sage and horses. They move low along a ridge until lanterns bloom in the distance. Bitterbrush Station lies in a shallow basin ringed by thorn and low juniper. The main house shows lamplight at 2 windows. Men cross the yard as shapes slow and sure of their ground. They settle belly down in a wash with a view that takes in everything. Jack steadies the glass on a stone and studies. He counts. 1 man at the door of the small cabin, 1 by the main house steps, a shape by the cookhouse, likely the dogs. He trades the glass to Lila. She watches longer than he did, then shorter. She has already decided where she needs to be. It is full dark when they split. Lila melts north through thorn shadows, a shape that loses its edges and becomes only a darker patch in the dark. Jack circles wide toward the stables. The smell of manure and hay drifts warm and thick. A horse stamps. The stars are clean. He eases a small window wider with his fingertips. The wood creaks once like a small animal and then quiets. He slides in and lands in straw. He moves like his bones remember something his skin forgot. He gathers armfuls of hay and makes small piles along the baseboards where he wants smoke to go. He opens stall latches as he passes not enough to send horses yet enough to make the push easy. The first flare whistles and pops at the far side of the yard, throws a brief bloodlight across faces turned that way. Shouts rise scatter. Jack strikes a match under his cupped hand. The flame eats air. He feeds it to hay. Fire takes small and then begins to lick. He moves and lights and moves again. He slides back out the window into cool air. He is a shadow along the stable wall, then a darker stone in the yard, then a breath against the small cabin door. The guard is turned toward the flare rifle at his shoulder. Jack steps behind him, uses the butt of the rifle once. The man goes down soft. Jack catches him and drags him into deeper shadow. He keeps his eyes on the ground and the door both at once. The key on the man's belt is a simple thing. It turns twice. The door opens into a room with air heavy from not enough breath. A woman sits on a narrow cot, hands folded back straight. Her hair is silver and thick. Her eyes make Jack feel seen, as if a candle has been set behind his ribs. More ironcloud, he says. "My name is Jack Mercer. Lila sent me." Her mouth softens like a string loosened a notch. Lila lives. She stands without help and takes a step. Her bare feet make no sound on the plank. She touches the door frame on the way out, a brief palm, a note for the wood to remember her. Jack gives her his arm. They move into air that carries smoke now. Horses start to clatter in their stalls. Men run. Someone yells for water. Someone yells for coal. They cross a slice of yard and drop into the shallow trench that runs along the fence line. The trench carries runoff in spring and stories in winter. Tonight it carries two people who do not belong and one who refuses to belong to anyone. Jack keeps his head low. He can taste the grit of the trench and the bleed of his wound. A voice comes hard and close at their backs. That is far enough. Cole Vance steps out of the smoke with two men to either side. The scar by his left eye makes the right look gentler. His rifle finds Jack without effort. Cole looks past Jack to Mora. He gives a small nod that is almost respect and then not. "Let the woman go," Cole says. "She walks with me," Jack says. His mouth feels dry and calm. He shifts a half step to show nothing to give Mora a little more trench. Cole's eye tracks the movement. His voice lowers. "You had a fine house, Mercer. Clean floors, good blue glass in the windows. Shame about the lamp." The smell of kerosene rides the air faint under the stronger smoke. Jack's jaw stiffens. He sees a room lit warm, a hand turning a wick, a door opening, the sudden rush of heat that does not belong. He keeps his rifle low, and the angle of his shoulder stupid, like a man who has forgotten how to stand straight. "You wanted to be family," Jack says, "but you were made for errands. That is why you always look for orders." Cole's mouth thins. The gun barrel dips a hair and comes back true. The men to his side shift to adjust to their leader and do not quite find it. Jack lifts the pistol from his hip and shoots not at a man, but at a lantern hung on a post behind Cole. The glass shatters. Oil runs bright as a thought and takes flame. Fire climbs the post. Light swallows dark in a rush. Horses scream the kind of sound that widens eyes. Lila is suddenly at Mora's other side, like she had always been there. She has a rope looped at her belt and a flare in her fist. She throws the flare into a pile of gunny sacks by the cookhouse, and the dogs there rear from the heat and bark against their chains and then bolts when a chain ring slips. Everything tilts. Men turn SWAT at fire, swear at smoke, shout each other's names. Jack shoves Mora into the deeper shadow of the trench and fires twice more to make men keep their heads down. He does not aim for hearts. He aims for walls and posts and things that fall between him and other rifles. Lila pulls Mora along the trench without forcing. Her voice is a thread. Left at the Cedar Ma, then the old gate, then the wash. They slide under a broken board where the fence sags. The night outside the yard is black and wide and smells like crushed sage. Jack is a beat behind them, breath loud in his ears. A bullet takes a bite out of the post beside his shoulder, and the splinters sting his cheek. He runs harder. Dogs find the hole in the fence and pour through. Their voices braid. Men reload and curse. Lanterns bob at the yard's edge and then in the brush. Lila pulls Mora into a gully, choked with rabbit brush, and keeps them low. Jack drops beside them and feels the earth cool his skin. The three of them breathe together, quiet as the rocks, while boots hammer past above, and the dogs nose the air and decide the scent runs on. A whip of wind carries the burn of oil and the heat of panicked horses. The brush sways once and settles. Lila touches her mother's wrist and then Jack's shoulder, one after the other, a count she seems to need for herself. They move again, angling toward darker ground, every foot touch chosen like a word. Behind them, the station yard finds new shouting. Cole's voice cuts through it low and hard. The dogs make a new sound and turn toward the wash. Lantern light grows brighter among the trees. The night pulls tight. The wash tightens around them, brush leaning in earth, smelling of crushed sage and wet root. The dogs lose the trail for a breath, then find it again. Lila listens for the change in their voices and hears a flute-like trill that does not belong to any dog. It comes from the rocks above and echoes once. She touches Mora's arm and holds still. Another trill answers from farther up the ridge. Then a stone clicks out of sight and the dogs swing wide, confused by the new music. A figure steps from a cleft bough, bent, but not drawn hair bound with a strip of red cloth. Nate Two Rivers lifts his chin at Lila. His face is young and old at once, eyes clear, mouth set in a line that can turn to a smile without warning. He gestures for silence and for haste. Lila nods. They follow him up a broken seam of rock that looks like nothing until your feet learn it. The wash falls away behind them. Lantern light combs the brush below and slides past. They climb to a shelf only the goats would love. The shelf leads to a little village tucked in a limestone pocket, houses shouldered against the cliff. Smoke rises straight and thin from two vents and vanishes. Women glance up and return to their work. Children watch for a heartbeat more. A man in a rawhide chair sets a hand on a carved stick and stands. Running Fox takes in Mora first and his face opens like a door. He touches his chest and steps forward. Mora meets him halfway and sets her forehead to his for the space of a breath. He turns to Lila and to Jack. His gaze on Jack is the weigh and measure kind, not hostile, not soft. "Your mother kept my grandson when his fever tried to take him," he says. "That is a debt that waits for the right day." "The right day is now," Mora says. Her voice is quiet and carries to every corner. Running Fox nods once. He gestures to a low table. Bread appears, dried meat, a pot of pine tea that tastes of green forest and resin. Lila keeps half an eye on the ridge. Jack sits only after Mora sits. He drinks and feels the fever crawl down a rung. Nate sets a map cut into buckskin on the table. His finger slides along lines that look like cracks in bone. He taps two marks with a rhythm. Whisper. Gorge sits here. Ashfall Falls hides what the land wants to keep. There is a path only the rock remembers. Running Fox looks to Mora. "You still know the words." "I know the way," Mora says. "Words do not open stone. Hands and respect do." He turns to Lila. "I send Nate with you. Fresh horse's water powder. 2 days if you do not let pride outrun your breath." Lila meets his eyes. "Thank you." He studies Jack a beat longer. "The man who wears grief like a shirt," he says. "If you fall behind, you do not stop. The land will hold you if you keep moving." Jack bows his head once. He does not promise anything out loud. They leave by a goat path that turns twice against the heart. The dogs below find nothing they like and go silent. Night eases off the ridge. Nate leads on a paint horse that steps as if counting. Lila rides at Mora's flank. Jack follows the bandage, pulling at his skin, each breath counting its own weight. The desert opens under a sky packed with starlight. A hawk crosses the sliver moon and goes black against silver, then gone. By morning they are into higher country where juniper stunts itself into stubborn twists and the rock shows its ribs. Serpent's Cut returns as another throat cooler and narrow. The air smells of limestone and damp leaf. Water ticks along the rock as if the earth had built itself a clock. Nate points once at a scuff in sand on a ledge, then at a whisper of soot on a branch where a man's hand rested too long. "Are they close?" Jack asks with his eyes. "Not close." Nate answers with one tilt of his head. They drop into Whisper Gorge when the sun is behind them and cannot look. The canyon walls rise in bands of rust and gold and gray. A clear stream threads the floor so clean you see where it hides its pebbles. Sound changes here. Footsteps become whispers, words lie down and sleep. Even the horses switch their ears as if listening to the story in the stone. The falls begin as a rumble. Ashfall Falls appears a turn later, white water shouldered off a lip and falling in sheets. Mist fills the air and puts silver on everything. Rainbows come and go like breath. The air tastes like cold metal and green shadow. Mora steps out of her shoes and stands on the ledge. She rubs a pinch of sage between her fingers and lets it go into the spray. She touches the cliff, not asking, not apologizing, just acknowledging. Then she looks at Lila and at Jack. Her eyes hold both of them, and the water and the memory of many mornings and nights. There, she says. Her hand shows a line just behind the falling water where the rock cuts back. Lila goes first. The sheet pounds her shoulders. The world becomes sound and cold skin and a sudden clean breath as she steps through into a hidden room. The cave is deeper than the water promises. Light spills in and turns green. The floor is dry underfoot. The air smells of stone and time and something that has not seen sun for years. Water makes the light dance on the cave ceiling like fish do in a river when you tilt your head upside down. Mora feels along a seam in the back wall and finds the flaw her fingers remember. She reaches into the dark and pulls until something gives. A copper tube slides out sealed with wax that looks like old honey. It is marked by a small dent as if a bullet once told it a secret and went elsewhere. She holds it to her chest for a breath, then passes it to Jack. His hands take it the way you take a newborn, awkward and careful. He sits cross-legged on the dry rock and scrapes the wax with the edge of Lila's knife until the seal opens. He draws the rolled papers into the light and the room breathes with him. The Ashford Accord spreads across his knees. Ink lines curve and state what men tried to forget. The signatures sit at the bottom, familiar loops and firm hands. Horace Blackstone's name lies there, precise and certain. A second signature is more beautiful, the hand of the Secretary of the Interior, the seal pressed under it. Lila's breath leaves her in a shape she had not known she was holding. Mora watches both of their faces and then looks to the water. Jack swallows and keeps looking. He pulls the blue glass bottle from the satchel, holds it to the paper the way he remembers Eleanor doing. Light through blue reveals what white light keeps shy. A watermark rises in the page lines. Only the careful can see an eagle tucked in a circle of leaves. He sets the bottle down with a care that borders on prayer. He touches the margin where Eleanor once wrote notes in a hand, the color of creek mud, quick and neat. He hears her voice in the scratch and the pause and the small sound she made when an idea fit. Footsteps grind on gravel outside. The sound carries in a way that makes the rock speak for it. Lila turns. Nate has already moved to the edge of the falls. He parts the water with his shoulder and looks out without showing his face. Riders, Nate says, small and flat, on the rim. Jack's hands move without thought. He rolls the pages and slides them back into the tube seals. The mouth with thumb and wax from the old lump wraps the leather ties, the string. He puts the tube into the satchel and closes the flap. The room narrows. Horses hit stone above with a rhythm that has nerves in it. Voices come down, clipped by distance. Mora looks into the deeper part of the cave. There is a second passage, she says. It is narrow. It does not love the careless. We will not light a lamp. Hold the wall. Do not speak. Listen to your feet. Lila takes her hand and then Jack's sleeve. Nate slips in last and draws his knife to cut a strip of cloth that will mark turns when he needs marking. The second passage swallows them whole. The air cools further. The sound of the falls becomes a heartbeat behind them. They feel the rock more than see it. The walls are damp and slick. Water drips along old routes and leaves a taste of limestone on the tongue. Lila runs her palm along the wall and feels a faint groove worn by other hands. Jack counts steps to keep his breath honest. Mora keeps to the front, touching where she needs to, never where she does not. A light flares behind them for a blink and goes out. The men outside have put a lantern where water does not want it. Shouts rise. A shot cracks and ricochets off stone. The sound claps the air and breaks into smaller pieces that jump and jump again. A flake of rock stings Jack's cheek. He does not reach up to touch the blood. He keeps his hand on the satchel strap and his shoulder on the wall. The passage rises. The air grows sweeter pine threaded into stone. Lila feels wind where there was none. She reaches forward and her fingers find cold day. Mora moves into that day. Nate is behind Lila now, turning once to listen before he climbs. He closes his knife without looking down. The lantern behind them flares a second time. Oil hisses when water hits it. Voices argue about rope. One voice says Cole's name and the sound tightens the space between ribs and spine. Lila takes the last step and the earth gives them its light. She pulls Mora into a narrow ravine with walls like giant ribs. Jack comes up next, breath loud, eyes bright in his tired face. Nate follows and slides a rock against the mouth with a low scrape. The scrape sounds like a door closing softly. The ravine swallows them, its walls sloping upward in jagged lines that slice the sky. Lila's breath comes in short, quiet bursts, her heart pounding in her chest like the thrum of a distant drum. Every step she takes feels heavier than the last, the weight of the satchel pulling at her side, the knowledge of what they carry pressing down with each passing moment. They move in near silence, the only sounds being the scrape of boots on rock, the occasional rustle of clothing, and the faint whisper of wind threading through the canyon. Nate leads the way, his movements fluid, practiced. He's been here before. The walls narrow as they climb, and Lila finds herself craning her neck to look upward, the sky shrinking with every step. They're being hunted! The thought keeps circling in Lila's mind like a buzzard circling over carrion. The riders behind them are relentless, their voices growing louder with each passing moment, as if they can smell the heat of their quarry on the air. Each time the sound of a horse's hooves strikes the stone, it sends a ripple of tension through the group. "Keep moving," Nate hisses, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're close." Lila doesn't need him to say it twice. She presses her hand to the rock beside her, feeling the rough texture under her fingers, grounding herself in the solidity of the earth, the only thing that remains constant in this shifting game of cat and mouse. They reach a fork in the ravine, two paths splitting off ahead. Nate doesn't hesitate. He takes the left, his footsteps quick but deliberate. Lila follows closely, then Jack and Mora bringing up the rear. The narrow passage feels like a throat closing in around them as they move deeper into the rock's embrace. The sound of their pursuers has quieted somewhat, but Lila knows better than to believe they've been left behind. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig makes her tense her eyes, darting to every shadow, every movement. She's waiting for the moment when they'll be caught, when the weight of everything they've worked for will come crashing down. A crack of gunfire rings out behind them, echoing through the narrow ravine like thunder. Lila flinches, her heart leaping into her throat. She doesn't stop running. Neither does anyone else. They reach the top of the ravine, the path opening up into a small plateau. The wind here is colder, sharper, carrying the scent of snow and ice. Lila looks around, her eyes scanning the jagged cliffs that encircle the plateau. There's no way forward, just an impasse of rock and sky. Nate stops abruptly, his hand shooting out to stop Lila and Jack from moving forward. His eyes flick to the right, where a shadow lingers against the cliff face. Another figure silhouetted against the pale sky. A man tall and thin, wearing a black duster and a wide-brimmed hat that casts a long shadow over his face. It's him. Lila doesn't need to be told. She's seen this man before, or at least someone like him. Someone who makes the air grow heavy like the calm before a storm. Cole, Nate says under his breath, as if the name alone is enough to explain everything. He's the one who's been tracking us. Lila feels her pulse quicken. The weight of the moment presses in on her chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She doesn't know how much longer they can keep running. This has gone too far. They're too close to the end. The man named Cole doesn't speak, but his presence fills the space like a dark cloud. His eyes glint with something hard, something cold as he steps forward, the sound of his boots muffled by the wind. "You're in my way," his voice is low, rough, like gravel being ground underfoot, "all of you." Lila's hands tremble at her sides, the cold of the air seeping into her bones. She's not afraid of him, not entirely, but she's afraid of what he represents. The end. The price of their journey. "We don't want trouble," Nate says, his voice calm but edged with something that hints at warning. "Just let us pass." Cole tilts his head, his gaze flicking between Nate, Lila, Jack, and Mora. He doesn't seem to be listening. Instead, his hand moves to the gun holstered at his side fingers, brushing the leather in a way that sends a cold shiver down Lila's spine. "Trouble is already here," he says, his lips curling into a smirk that doesn't reach his eyes. "You should have stayed away." Lila feels the tension in the air snap like the twang of a bowstring before it lets loose an arrow. She doesn't have time to think, doesn't have time to react. All she knows is that she has to move, has to do something, anything, to make sure they don't fall into Cole's trap. Her hand flies to the satchel at her side, her fingers brushing the edge of the leather. She doesn't even think about it. She's not sure if she's trying to protect what's inside or protect herself. All she knows is that if they don't act now, they'll be too late. Suddenly, the ground shifts beneath her feet. A rock loose from the path rolls away with a sharp sound. The plateau shakes and a crack splits the air. Nate moves first, pulling a knife from his belt and slashing at the air in front of him. Jack's hand flies to his own sidearm, and Mora pulls something from beneath her cloak, a thin coil of rope prepared for anything. Cole, however, remains still. His eyes lock onto Lila's, and for the briefest of moments she sees something dark flicker behind them. Not anger, something colder, something far worse. Then, with no warning, the ground beneath them gives way. The cliff edge crumbles, and for a heartbeat, Lila's world tilts. Her legs flail her arms, reaching out for anything to hold on to. The rock is crumbling, splitting apart under the weight of the tension. The pressure, the danger that's been building for days, for weeks, maybe even years. The last thing she hears before the world tilts into chaos is a voice she's only heard in nightmares whispering her name. The world spins in a blur of rock and dust. Lila's heart pounds in her chest, her body weightless for a split second before the earth pulls her down with brutal force. Her breath is knocked out of her, the wind stinging her face like shards of ice as the ground rises to meet her. She lands hard, her body sprawling across jagged stones, the air forced from her lungs in a rush. Her vision blurs, her ears ringing from the fall, the sounds of the world drowned out by the hammering of her pulse. A wave of nausea rises in her throat, but she fights it down, forcing herself to focus. Her body aches, the pain spreading through her limbs like wildfire. She scrambles to her feet, every inch of her skin screaming from the impact. The satchel is still clutched in her hand, its contents pressing against her side, a constant reminder of why she can't stop, why she has to keep moving. The others are on the ground around her. Mora lying still, her eyes closed, Jack pushing himself to his knees, and Nate already standing, his gaze scanning the cliff edge above. A quick survey tells her that they're all alive, but they've been separated by the fall, scattered in different directions. "Are you okay?" Jack's voice is rough as he crawls toward her, his face pale and scraped. "I'm fine," Lila answers, though she can barely feel her legs. "We need to get out of here." But Nate doesn't answer. His gaze is fixed on the cliff above them, his eyes narrowing as if he's waiting for something. His hand twitches near the knife at his belt, his stance defensive. "Look," he mutters, his voice tight. "We're not alone." Lila turns toward the edge of the plateau, her breath catching in her throat. The sky above is thick with dust, the wind carrying the echoes of voices faint and distant like the fading call of a storm. She's never seen anything like this before. The riders who had been following them, she can hear them now closer than ever, the thunder of hooves growing louder, the sound of pursuit bearing down on them like the final judgment. They're closing in. Nate doesn't hesitate. He grabs Lila's arm and pulls her toward the nearest outcropping of rock, motioning for the others to follow. They scramble to their feet, the urgency of the moment propelling them forward, their footsteps barely making a sound on the loose earth. "Go," Nate hisses. But the moment they reach the shelter of the rocks, it's too late. A figure appears at the top of the cliff, silhouetted against the sky. Lila's breath catches in her throat as she sees him, Cole, standing tall, his eyes locked on hers. His expression is unreadable, but there's something in the set of his jaw, something cold in the way he holds himself that tells her this is the end. "You can't outrun me," Cole calls down, his voice carrying through the silence. "Not anymore." Lila feels a shiver run down her spine. She wants to scream, to fight back, to push him away, but she knows it's no use. They're trapped. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The canyon is too narrow, the cliff's too steep. They're exposed. "Give it up," Cole continues, his voice almost soothing. "You've got what you wanted, haven't you? The treasure, the proof. But it's too late now. You've gone too far." Lila's heart races, a mix of fear and fury twisting in her gut. She won't let him win. Not now. Not after everything they've been through. With a sharp breath, she pulls the satchel from her side, the leather worn from days of travel. It feels heavy in her hands, heavier than ever, but it's all she has, all they have. "Stay down," Nate orders as he steps forward, his knife gleaming in the dim light. Jack and Mora crouch behind him, their faces grim. Cole steps closer to the edge, his gaze never leaving Lila's. "You think you can protect her? You're as foolish as she is." Without warning, Nate lunges. It's a blur of motion, a quick, calculated strike aimed at the man who's been hunting them for so long. The blade slices through the air, but Cole is faster. He steps back, drawing his own gun in a single fluid motion, the metallic click of the hammer cocking echoing through the ravine. The world slows. Lila watches helpless as the barrel of Cole's gun points directly at Nate's chest. "No," she screams. In the same instant, a shot rings out. The air around them seems to crackle with energy, the sound sharp and deafening. But it's not Cole's gunshot. It's a second shot fired from the opposite direction, coming from above the plateau, echoing across the ravine. Cole stumbles, his hand jerking back, the gun falling from his fingers. His eyes widen in shocked disbelief, flashing across his face as blood stains his shirt. Lila turns, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerges from the shadows above a rider, tall and commanding, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. The wind picks up around him, swirling dust at his feet as he moves with purpose down toward them. "Who the hell?" Cole starts, but his words are lost in a gasp as he crumples to the ground, his body hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. The rider dismounts his boots, hitting the earth with a soft thud. Lila can barely make out his features as he approaches the dust, swirling around him like a storm. but as he steps closer, his face comes into view, and she recognizes him. It's Grayson. Her breath catches. "Grayson," she whispers, barely believing what she's seeing. He looks different, weathered, older. His face is covered with stubble, his eyes dark with fatigue, but there's no mistaking him. "You made it," she says, a surge of relief and disbelief flooding through her. Grayson nods, his gaze sharp as he looks over the group. "We don't have much time. They'll be back. We need to move." Lila nods, her heart pounding in her chest. They're not safe yet, but for the first time in what feels like forever, she feels a glimmer of hope. Grayson pulls a small rifle from his back, glancing briefly at the others. "Get up," he says. "We've got one chance to get out of here alive." And with that, they begin to move. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.